When Frank Wilczek, who won the 2004 Nobel Prize in Physics for his work in theoretical science, which led to the groundbreaking work on dark matter, as well as acknowledging his studies on the nature of the early universe, was asked how he reconciles his religious belief with science, Frank responded, "Many of the conflicts between religion and science arise because they're answering different questions. In science, you're broadly asking, how does this work? In religion, you're asking, what does this mean and what should I do about it?" Frank refuses to remove his religious beliefs from his research in science and his most recent work on understanding dark matter, in which he describes what God did to make the anion, a particle that only shows up in two-dimensional systems, exist. He says he is often questioned by researchers and reporters about why he involves God in his research, and he explains that his heroes include Galileo, Newton, and Maxwell, who are great scientists who are always curious about the nature of God. And they discovered the only way to study God is to look at God's handiwork. Frank says he's delighted as he studies the universe and asserts as he digs deeper into the mechanics of nature and space that he finds God everywhere. Whether he's looking at an anion or digging deeper into the strange alchemy at work in the nucleus of an atom, he says he sees the symmetrical patterns that appear naturally in the universe, circles and triangles. These symmetrical patterns, the circle and triangle, are, in his opinion, God's favorite building tools. And he claims that what makes the circle and triangle unique is that no matter how one turns them or even flips them over, they remain symmetrical. Thus, they change without changing. It's this unique property which describes the shepherd of Psalm 23. Like the circle, the shepherd who represents God in this poem is symmetrical in the sense that the shepherd is the same from every angle. A shepherd who makes me lie down in green pastures, leads me beside still waters, restores my soul, leads me in right paths, walks with me through the darkest valley, prepares a table before me, and anoints my head with oil. God has done these things throughout history. For example, God liberated the Hebrews from slavery in Egypt, provided healing and protection when Israel was distressed or was threatened by famine. And today, God provided wisdom to persons in the medical sciences so that they would discover vaccines which can help us overcome this deadly global pandemic. The shepherd leads us, walks on our journey with us, prepares the right things for us, all while protecting us and anointing us with blessings. The psalmist describes these actions as the beauty of God, which ultimately is God's symmetry, as God has the ability to change without change. Utilizing Psalm 23, we see God working in a circular pattern as we constantly keep churning through a number of daily activities. Biblical scholar J. Clinton McCann Jr. describes this psalm as a poem about having a God-centered life, writing. This psalm puts daily activities such as eating, drinking, and seeking security into a radically God-centered perspective. The psalm takes us through the cycle of life and challenges us to put God at the center. With God as our center in life, then we too would enjoy symmetrical lives as God, as the shepherd, remains at the center of everything we do. Digging deeper into the psalm, the psalmist proclaims that the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. These words suggest that the psalmist has no needs nor wants, as though God has provided everything they will ever need. Yet we may question this statement, especially as we are well beyond tired of this pandemic. I specifically wonder about other persons who have suffered in the biblical narratives. Persons like Elijah, who fled for his life from Jezebel. The Hebrews, as they immigrated into the promised land. And the early church, who face persecution because of their faith. Still, it's possible that the psalmist was speaking more broadly, perhaps symmetrically, as they took a broad view of their whole life and the life of God's people. The author of Hebrews echoes this long view approach when they address the community of faith, claiming they have received the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. In the book of Exodus, Joshua also reminded the Hebrews of this after they crossed the Jordan River into the promised land, declaring, "The Lord your God has blessed you in all your undertakings. These 40 years the Lord your God has been with you. You have lacked nothing." In the symmetrical circle of Psalm 23, God is portrayed as the one who provides food and green pastures, refreshing and life-giving water from the still waters, plus safety and security. The circle keeps churning and rotating from food to drink to physical safety. And in all these areas, God gives us everything we need. The psalmist says that God restores my soul, which could be translated as God keeps me alive. Through all of the changes of our daily lives, God consistently and constantly provides for us change without change. One of the challenges and assurances that the psalmist offers is that by remaining focused on the changeless God, even while we go through many changes in our life, especially difficult ones, the point here is that God remains the Good Shepherd, which requires both proof and faith. Naturally, we want proof that following God will lead to safe locations, especially when the paths to reach the destination take us through deep valleys where the shadows are long and the path is rocky and filled with danger. We also want an idea about where the destination is located or what we will encounter along the way. But as anyone who has ever taken a canoe or a boat out on the lake knows, they must constantly be asking themselves, what can possibly go wrong? And then be prepared for trouble to come along. Because, of course, the best sailors are the ones who can quickly assess the situation and make appropriate adjustments for those times when they didn't expect things to go wrong, yet go wrong. The psalmist acknowledges that God, who is unchangeable, is also flexible enough to respond to trouble that we encounter and comes to our aid to give protection and remain with us so we heal from our wounds. After all, the psalmist recognizes that the way to the destination is not always smooth sailing or a walk through a rose garden. The valleys and shadowed paths are surrounded by predators. But all the while, God, the Good Shepherd, is right there as well in the center. Fortunately, as the Lord loves symmetry, so the Lord constantly remains active in our lives to help us each and every time we encounter trouble. The psalmist states, reassuring us that even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and staff, they comfort me. Bible scholar McCann says that this verse is the structural and theological center of Psalm 23, reminding us that even in the most life-threatening situation, God's provision is sufficient. This includes when we are bombarded with bad news of COVID-19 and its variants, or we experience a change in jobs or the lack thereof, or as our retirement plans are impacted. Whatever our troubled valley or shadowed path, the psalmist reminds us that God is there as well, comforting us with a rod and a staff. Now, while these tools of the shepherd sound dangerous, in the life of the sheep, the rod is an object that taps on the ground to ensure there are no loose stones or dangerous snakes nearby. The tapping of the rod is comforting because the path is less dangerous than before. And the staff is an object that when sheep fall into a crevice or wander off the path, The staff is designed so that the shepherd can lift the sheep to safety. Thus, with God as our shepherd, we'll fear no evil, for God taps the ground before us. And though we may still encounter troubles, thankfully, the Lord also knows how to heal our wounds, where to pour the oil to anoint and soothe our souls. The Lord knows where we hurt, and it's in healing our souls, our body, and our minds that the Lord transitions from caring shepherd to a gracious host. Once again, God's goodness remains constant while the situation changes. The psalmist proclaims, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows." In this part of the poem, to complete the circle, the host repeats exactly what they had done at the beginning of the psalm, providing food, drink, and protection. Change without change. Throughout all the difficult and disturbing changes of life, we are cared for by a changeless God. Although we face threats to our physical, emotional, and spiritual health, God remains at the center of our lives and gives us the assurance that surely goodness and mercy will follow you all the days of your life. And we are assured also that we will dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. Thankfully, as our lives seem to be like a wheel, where we feel God's support and embrace, and then suddenly we are down, stumbling through the dark valleys, and yet then we receive goodness and mercy. Still, moreover, suddenly we worry about our daily needs. So we receive assurance that God is with us as a table of food and an overflowing cup are set before us. Then, tripping over hazards, we become unsure about our futures. And still, once again, we're invited by God to dwell in the house of the Lord, recalling that whatever perils we are facing, God will be faithfully at hand, so we receive peace. In this way, for better or worse, we have a symmetrical life. But emphasizing the positive, this symmetrical life we have, which encounters threats, is balanced by God's help. Our daily needs are balanced by God's gifts, and our anxiety about tomorrow is balanced by God's promises. It's incredible that the psalmist recognized this symmetry, which exists throughout the universe, even down to the atomic level. A symmetry that God created so that the pattern is found throughout all of creation. Green pastures are balanced by dark valleys, but in both joy and sorrow, the Lord provides for us and walks beside us, in front of us, and behind us. God is constantly guiding, protecting, and sheltering us so that no matter what changes may come, God is the one who keeps us centered, as God is central in our lives. Symmetrical, with our shepherd at the heart of the circle.